Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. A millionaire's wife humiliated her childhood nanny, but her husband's response was such that everyone froze. In the Carters' sumptuous mansion on Fifth Avenue, where the luxury windows blend into the marble walls, a golden light bathed the salons like a caress of opulence. That evening, the antique molded ceilings echoed with the sounds of hushed laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the quiet murmur of a string quartet playing near the central staircase. The evening was in full swing, celebrating the 50th birthday of James Carter, a financial magnate known as much for his visionary investments as for his discreet public stance. He wasn't a man who liked the spotlight, but tonight he'd been persuaded. Not for himself, for appearances, for Emily. Emily Carter, in fact, stood in the center of the room like a queen in her palace. Her black dress, elegantly slid up the side, hugged her curves with surgical precision. Her haughty carriage and studied smile made her a figure to be admired as much as feared. She never spoke too loudly. She never fully expressed her emotions. But she knew exactly who was who had said what, and how to manipulate the space around her. With a single glance, she could make a waitress back down, reposition a guest, or express her disdain without saying a word. She had the beauty of those photographed, but the heart of those never softened by life. This world of crystals, silk, and power was her territory, and she only tolerated the elements she could control. In the midst of this well-orchestrated ball, a dissonance arose. A discreet figure stepped into the room. An elderly woman, erect despite her years, dressed in a modest cream-colored suit, her hair neatly but unadornedly pinned up. Her bag was worn by time, her shoes perfectly polished but from another era. She seemed out of place, and yet, she walked with the dignity of one who has nothing left to prove. Conversations froze for a few seconds as she passed. Some guests looked at each other, intrigued. Others raised their eyebrows, not recognizing this woman among the regulars at this type of party. But she wasn't trying to fit in. She was trying someone. Grace Wilson. She moved slowly, but with contained emotion in each step. She hadn't seen James in years, since he'd been swept away by business, by travel, by his life as a public figure. But he'd always kept in touch. Letters, calls at Christmas, a bouquet on her birthday, and, a week ago, a handwritten invitation, signed by him. A single word scribbled at the bottom, come. For me, she had come. Because before he was one of the richest men on the East Coast, James Carter had been a broken little boy, with dark circles under his eyes and an orphaned heart. And she, Grace, had held him when he cried silently in the guest room of the small apartment where she lived. She had taught him to read, to believe in himself, to get back up after every fall. She didn't come for the riches. She didn't want anything. Just to see him again. Just to hug him. To tell him she was proud. Grace hadn't come to make a discreet appearance. It wasn't her habit to barge in where she wasn't wanted. But this time, she hadn't doubted it for a moment. A few days earlier, she had received a thick, ivory-colored envelope, carefully sealed with a wax seal. The handwriting on the address had immediately made her heart race. It was James's. She would recognize it among 1,000. Inside, a letter. Simple, sincere, handwritten. Dear Grace, I'm turning 50 this Saturday. It won't be a celebration if you're not here. What I've built is thanks to you. Come, I want to introduce you to the world. And most of all, I want to see you. With all my love, James. She had reread those words a dozen times, tears welling in her eyes. For a moment, she had hesitated. What was she going to do there, among those people in tuxedos and ball gowns? She had never sought recognition, but something in James's tone had convinced her this was important to him. So she put on her best outfit, a suit she'd kept since the 1990s, meticulously pressed. She delicately combed her hair, applied a little pale lipstick, and headed to the manor, her heart pounding. But barely had she crossed the threshold of the great hall when the dream cracked. Emily Carter spotted her immediately, like a drone spots a target. Standing near a group of Silicon Valley investors, Emily lifted her chin, her cold gaze fixed on the unassuming figure moving among the guests. A wave of disapproval crossed her face, as if Grace's mere presence had sullied the perfection of her evening. She stepped forward, a glass of champagne in her hand, followed mechanically by two of her friends, who already smelled scandal like hyenas smell blood. Who let this person in? Emily said sharply, looking the old woman up and down. A few heads turned. The quiet murmur of conversation slowly faded, replaced by a tense silence. Grace stopped, confused. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her hands trembled slightly on the bag she clutched to her. Emily stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply on the marble. "Ms. Wilson, this is not the place for you." His voice was calm, but each syllable was a disguised slap. "Tonight, we are receiving diplomats, business leaders, important figures. You will understand that it is best to leave discreetly." Grace felt her heart clench. She had never been ashamed of being simple. But there, in this icy room, under the curious and sometimes mocking stares, she felt like an intruder. Her gaze lowered, not out of submission, but to hold back her tears. "Excuse me, I thought that." She didn't have the strength to finish her sentence. And suddenly, a voice broke the silence. "Emily, stop." James. He had seen it all. From the balcony overlooking the room, he had observed the scene. With calm but determined steps, he descended the steps silently, his glass still in his hand. He wasn't smiling. His eyes were dark. All eyes turned to him. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Emily froze. She immediately recognized the tone he'd just used. The one he only used when he was deeply disappointed. A tone she hadn't heard in years. James walked over to Grace and stood between her and his wife. "Grace is the most important person in my life." Her voice was calm, but thick with emotion. "Without her, I wouldn't be here. Without her, I'd probably be dead, broken, or lost." A murmur of astonishment ran through the room. Emily raised an eyebrow, arms crossed, irritated at the way control was slipping away from her. "James, you forget that we are in my world. This world of luxury, protocols, dignity. This woman has brought you nothing but dust." It was a mistake. James turned slowly to face her. His gaze was icy, harder than anyone had ever seen it. "You call that dust?" He raised his voice slightly. "She gave me love, patience, humanity. And you? What did you give but appearances?" The room hung on his every word. He turned to Grace again, more tender this time, and took her hand. "Grace, come with me." She hesitated, upset, but he gently insisted. "You're at home here. You always have been." And, hand in hand, they walked away, surrounded by the guests, who parted as they passed by like the Red Sea before Moses. He made no apologies. He held nothing back. He affirmed, with shocking clarity, to anyone who would see it, that this woman meant far more to him than any wealth or social position. Emily, frozen, her gaze burning with rage, remained alone, surrounded by whispers she could no longer control. Later, in the subdued silence of James's private office, the outside world seemed to have stood still. Neither the murmurs from the reception desk nor the notes of the string quartet reached here. Everything was polished wood, aged leather, and memories frozen in frames. On the wall, a yellowed photograph showed a little boy in an oversized sweater, sitting on the lap of a woman with gentle eyes. Grace, younger, smiling despite the fatigue of a modest daily life. Sitting across from each other, James and Grace shared this moment as if they were finding a forgotten refuge. "Do you remember when you thought I was going to abandon you?" Grace asked, her voice barely more than a whisper, thick with emotion. She didn't dare look at him. Her hands were mechanically crumpling a white handkerchief lying on her knees. "After you left for college, the letters stopped. I waited for years." "I know," James replied, his voice thick with regret. He looked down, unable for a moment to meet her gaze. "I wrote to you, but my letters remained stuck between two trips, two meetings, two misplaced ambitions." He paused. "With each success, I thought of you, but I told myself I would see you soon. And the soon never came." He took a deep breath, his voice growing deeper, more vulnerable. "You were the light in my darkness, Grace. The only person who loved me without expecting anything in return." She looked at him then, her eyes shining. "You were my little miracle, James. And despite the silences, I never stopped praying for you." He stood up slowly, walked around the desk, and knelt in front of her. "Tonight, I make you a promise, Grace. I will never leave you in the shadows again." She stroked his hair gently, as she had when he was a child, her heart overflowing with silent tenderness. The next morning, the sun bathed the manor's private dining room in a pale light. The crisp white tablecloth, silver cutlery, and warm croissants created an illusion of normalcy. Emily sat opposite James, dressed in an ivory silk dressing gown, holding a cup of tea. Her face was closed, wary. She sensed something had changed since yesterday. James calmly placed his napkin back on the table. His gaze was clear and determined. "Emily, I want you to know that my decision is made." She raised an eyebrow. "What decision?" He fixed his gaze on hers. "I am asking for a divorce." The silence that followed was so brutal that even the waiter in the background stopped breathing for a moment. "You're joking," she said finally, attempting a dry laugh. "No, I'm more serious than I've ever been. A woman who humiliates the one who saved my soul has no place by my side." Emily paled. Her mask was slowly crumbling. "James, you're not going to destroy everything we've built because of some old housekeeper. She's not a governess. She's my heart mother. She raised me when my own mother abandoned me. She saved me when I was too broken to cry. She taught me how to stand tall." Emily gripped her cup so tightly that the china cracked. "Do you want to humiliate me? I want to set the record straight. Tonight, I will present Grace to the press as the person who built the man I am." He stood up calmly. "You've always been obsessed with your image, Emily. I'm finally ready to honor mine." He left the room, leaving her frozen, her lips parted, unable to formulate a response. A few weeks later, the Metropolitan Hall's grand auditorium was packed. Hundreds of journalists, influencers, patrons, politicians, and entrepreneurs had gathered to attend the exceptional press conference convened by James Carter, the enigmatic billionaire whose recent personal choices had already generated much discussion. Cameras lined up at every corner, ready to broadcast the event live across the country. On stage, a simple lectern. Behind it, a huge screen on which was written in simple letters, revealing what really matters. When James entered, dressed in a sober midnight blue suit, the room rose. He bowed briefly, without smiling excessively, with the new gravity everyone had noticed in him over the past few weeks. He spoke, his deep, calm voice echoing through the room. "In recent years, I've been celebrated for my investments, my strategies, my empire. But today, I'm here to celebrate someone else. A woman who gave me everything money can never buy." A murmur ran through the audience. "This woman is not just my nanny. She is my mother of the heart, my example of courage, integrity, kindness. When I was an abandoned child, it was she who reached out to me. It was she who taught me to read, to respect myself, to not let anger consume me." He stopped, emotion in his throat. "Without her, I wouldn't be the man you see today. Without her, there would be no Carter Company, no foundation, no billionaire. There would only be a lost boy." Then he turned to the curtain at the back of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Grace Wilson." The curtain slowly parted, and Grace appeared. She wore an elegant but understated blue dress, her gray hair neatly styled. As she stepped into the spotlight, her hands trembled slightly. Never in her life had she imagined she would find herself on a stage, applauded by an entire crowd. She had spent her life in the background, invisible, silent. But today, she became visible, publicly honored. James greeted him with a sincere hug, in front of hundreds of flashes. He continued, "That is why, today, I announce the creation of the Foundation Grace Wilson. It will be dedicated to supporting children who have been abandoned, abused, and forgotten by the system. We will offer them what Grace offered me, a home, a chance, and above all, true love." The auditorium erupted into a standing ovation. Several journalists were in tears. Some of the patrons present then spontaneously approached to offer their support to the foundation. In the following weeks, the image of Grace and James went viral. Social media was ablaze. Tens of thousands of messages of gratitude, tributes, and testimonies from orphans and adoptive families were sent to the foundation. Children in the most remote corners of the country began to receive aid, scholarships, and mentors. Grace, despite her modesty, actively participated in the moral direction of the foundation. She was seen visiting homes, talking to children, and listening to their stories. Her natural gentleness touched those whom even social workers had given up on understanding. James, for his part, gradually moved away from the hectic world of high finance. He remained active, but different, simpler, more human. and always Grace by his side. Emily, on the other hand, faced a completely different reality. The divorce was settled quietly, but social circles were unforgiving of her public humiliation. The press leaked the recordings of the gala scene, and her coldness came under harsh criticism. The luxury brands she represented drifted away from her. She attempted to launch a new public relations project, without success. Soon, she disappeared from the limelight, relegated to the margins of a world she thought she controlled. She had lost everything, not because of James, but because of herself, because of his contempt, because of his arrogance. She had forgotten that love is not measured by money or elegance. In a TV interview that went viral, a reporter asked James, "You've built an empire, but what is your greatest achievement?" He didn't hesitate, "Having found the one who taught me to love before learning to lead, and to say thank you to her." This story, told again and again, reminded the world of a fundamental truth. That true power lies neither in fortunes nor in titles, but in the gratitude of the heart, and that a gesture of love, from the past, can redefine an entire future.